And scene.
All right. Well, let's just get on into it. For anybody new around here, what we like to do is give a in-depth recap of the episode before we dive into our discussion so that everybody's on the same page. And we actually cut that recap out, host it separately on YouTube for your viewing convenience. So if you are on just the recap and you want to catch Blake and I's full discussion on the episode, it will be linked down in the description below. So let me pull up my notes here and let's dive into. Oh, I don't know the title. Do you know the title, by the way?
Seeking Sedition.
Okay. Which is episode 88 of campaign 3. So we pick up with Bell's Hells hiding in this basement where we left them in the previous episode. The basement of the Jagged Edge, which was like this kind of blacksmithy shop sort of thing. They're hiding down here because there's basically a lot of heat on them from a previous battle they had just had in the middle of the street. So Laudna casts darkness, and everybody basically just gets silent and stops moving. They can hear the footsteps above, its guards basically investigating all the commotion from earlier. And they're just, trying to bide their time and see if they can coast on out of here. But eventually they hear the hatch to the basement begin to open. And one of the guards is one of those Sasquatch creatures that we still don't have a proper name for, I don't think. And he's kind of confused by just the darkness that he sees when he looks below. So he whistles, and one of these tunnel worm type creatures that the party had seen previously shows up, and it's, been domesticated, if you will. Maybe not, that's not the right word, but trained.
Yeah.
To work with the Vanguard. And it basically sends it in to go investigate the darkness. And we come to find out that these things don't have eyes, but rather they have some sort of like sensory gland on their face. So, a tremor sense as well. So investigating in the darkness for them is easy. So it comes down here, starts searching around. We have to make a group stealth check. Everyone rolls pretty well, except for Fern and FCG, with Fern rolling a nat 1. And so the party's kind of nervous, and Laudna's kind of like front and center with how they're positioned. And so she kind of watches this creature just burrow down and disappear into the earth. And next thing she knows, it just bursts out of a nearby wall as it's just investigating. So she has to make like, I think, an athletics check or something to kind of like nimbly move so that it doesn't like run into her when it's bursting out. And she successfully does. So the creature then makes some sort of noise to communicate with the guard up top. And the guard says, okay, well then come back up. So seemingly the worm was like, nothing down here. But right after that happens, 2 more of these worms burst out of other parts of the wall. So clearly there's like a team of these things that we're investigating. So we have to have Imogen and Fern also make athletics checks to see if they can dodge. Unfortunately, Imogen fails. So this worm realizes there's something here, and it just starts biting down on her head. And so like They're trying to be quiet. So she doesn't like scream. She doesn't move. She just lets this thing like start eating her head. Laudna can see this happening. So she tries to distract this worm with one of the dead Ryloran fingers that they have. And she actually rolls a nat 20. So this is successful. But basically as soon as it finishes eating the finger she threw, it just runs back to Imogen. So at this point, Imogen, I think, is continuing to roll like really poorly. So she just like starts to attack it, but even that fails. And at this point, we just roll initiative because the thing like had started to eat the whole top half of her body. I think we find out that these things are actually called slithers at this point. Right. So Fern wild shapes into one, with the plan being that she is going to go upstairs and pretend to be the one that they're fighting down here so that nothing seems amiss as far as the guards are concerned. So she goes up and does that and rolls like a really high performance check, so sells it. And then they basically start to leave, the guards and the other slithers. Meanwhile, down in the basement, the party is, fighting this one slither that's still down there. Pretty quick in combat, all things considered. They end up taking care of it. And afterwards, Laudna drops the darkness, and FCG goes and heals Imogen, who, took some substantial damage. They reconvene with Zesh, who is like really surprised that they didn't get caught. And then Ashton, FCG, and I think a few of them actually start asking more about the glass weapons that are here. Meanwhile, though, Fern is leading the rest of these guards and stuff a few blocks away, and then she like slithers up to a nearby door and kind of like barks, like saying like something's interesting here. We should check this out. So all of the other slithers follow her lead and then burrow underground to like go investigate this house. So Fern also burrows underground, but instead of going there, she doubles back to head back to the party. And she actually gets lost, and FCG has to help like navigate her back. But eventually, they all get back. And meanwhile, the party has, I think, bought a few of them have bought some of these glass weapons. I think Orem checks out a sword. Um, Laudna gets a couple of daggers that she plans on putting on Shishimi, and I believe Ashton gets like a new gauntlet or something to that effect. And and finally FCG gets like a gem imbued in their chest to serve as like a mood ring, basically to show when their stress levels are going crazy. Laudna also during this time checks the scry ball and sees that Odahan is still in the middle of the city. So Fern at this point is back, and so she takes the chest that they actually got in the previous episode during the battle where the Ryloran Juggernaut was carrying a cart that had a chest in it. So that same chest, she takes it downstairs to dispel magic on it. She does, so the protections shatter. Chet then lockpicks this, and inside is this hexagonal device that is similar to ones they've seen around the Malleus Key. That were like dispelling the magic. But this one is seemingly much more refined. But it also looks rough, as if it's like maybe very old or it's just, been handled poorly. Laudna, I think, makes an Arcana check at first and gets a nat 20 and is like, yeah, this thing disrupts abjuration magic. And it's very similar to something you've seen before. And she realizes that the runes on it remind her of the same runes she saw in Imahara Joe's shop when he was working on FCG. So this is like ancient Aeorian technology. And that's where we go to break on the first half.
Awesome, man. So coming back, they also get some of the Meridian glass that Zesh's shop seems to specialize in. And they find out, what you already mentioned, they had gotten the different weapons, but Chetney specifically also got a scythe on top of that. And they find out some special properties about this glass. First of all, namely that they crit on an attack roll of an 18 to 20. Additionally, once they do crit, they have to roll a 1d6, and it's through this that the glass may break permanently, being glass and all. This glass has special advantages when within 60 feet of a psychonic person, a psychically gifted person, i.e. Imogen. And these benefits make the weapon more likely to hit. The target, when struck, then has disadvantage on certain saves. And also the glass will always glow as well, almost like kind of like a moon touch broadsword was kind of the impression I got. You mentioned already the box that they looked at. And they essentially decide where should we go next? Let's go check out the Overspoke, which the Overspoke was the tower that they were told to go to the top of and basically ask for Erot to then find like the location of like the Volition hidden base. So they head to the Overspoke and they're trying to decide like what to do, like how to best, like this whole episode and the previous episode has been all about like how do we get past like the city guard and things like that. Chetney's going to hand over his toy that can charm someone. And ultimately Imogen just sort of pretends to be Liliana. She approaches the tower and they immediately are like, oh, we didn't know you were coming. And it's very much like, don't ask me about my business. You're beneath me. And Imogen decides to head to the top of the tower. Laudna accompanies her almost like a bodyguard. I think Laudna also casts like unsettling presence to kind of help with this as well. They make it all the way to the top of the Overspoke, and there is Erot. And Erot's kind of a quirky fellow. It's implied later on that despite them being in this city with many telekinetically or psychic inhabitants that maybe Erot isn't as gifted in that way, and possibly like this is now like sort of his lowly job, being at the top of this the Overspoke. Similar to what we saw down below, Imogen's implying herself to be Liliana, and they begin looking for this purple flag out across the city that's supposed to mark the entrance to the Volition's secret base. They borrow a spyglass from Erot. They eventually do see this purple flag. They then leave, make their way out with the whole party. Chetty gets his toy back, and they eventually all get to a space that's kind of like, Matt almost sort of describes it to be kind of like a junkyard of just an enormous amount of discarded rock and earth. Like whenever like a tunnel's being built, like all that stone has to go somewhere, and it's kind of like a landfill of all of that stuff. At this place, this really squirrely character comes out who's very nervous. Again, immediately assumes Imogen to either be Liliana or be related to Liliana. And this is Watcher Amido. It is very much like the farthest out eyes for the Volition to make sure no one's approaching. They announce that they're here to meet the Volition, that they're not with the Imperium, and to basically trust them to go meet the rest of the Volition's forces. There's many great roles that happen in this point. Amido, in terms of persuasion, Amido finally leads them down into the tunnel. They have to also enter through I think it was like 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, like just not to draw any eyes or things like that. They get led down this tunnel, and they eventually, it's kind of like, this is a really big throwback, but really early on in Drusar, when they were down like in like kind of like the subway-ish kind of feel of the city, where they went and met, it wasn't the Immortal Syndicate, it was the other one. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Dorian's brother was part of.
Yeah.
Well, in that episode, they were sort of led through like this winding corridor, and it opened up into like this chamber with like tons of the people there. Yeah. This is kind of what happens. Amido leads them down this long tunnel. It opens up into this large chamber, and it is essentially a chamber full of all of these members of the Volition. And they kind of circle around Bell's Hells, including one particular person, Rashina, who is known as the Golden Hammer and is the leader of the Volition. Rashina immediately notices Imogen's likeness compared to Liliana, and basically says like, hey, so what's the deal with that? And Imogen's like, yeah, that's my mom. Matt describes weapons being drawn, like people being very nervous. And again, with some perception checks, some very high rolls, they convince Rashina that they're not part of the Ruby Vanguard, and more importantly, that they're not an unknowing weapon of the Weave Mind. Rashina basically says, that's enough for us to go on from now. And also mentions, I think it was the 5 masters of the Weave Mind, or the 5 lords of the Weave Mind. Yeah. But essentially these 5 characters who are presumably like the core characters of the Weave Mind, and then leads them over to like this large, like opaque wall of glass. Rashina waves her hand, the glass becomes transparent, and it is here where we actually see the true heart of Kravirus, this basically massive sprawling city underground, buildings, bridges, very I was gonna say Dune Modir, but that's not right, but very much like Mines of Moria kind of vibe to it. And this central spire with glowing crystals in the center of this massive expanse, presumably maybe where Predathos is housed. And that is where our episode comes to an end. Episode 88, Seeking Sedition. So if you're watching just the recap, we have a link in the description for the full episode breakdown. We want to know what you think about it as well, so click the link and check that out.